Hi, everyone. I had to wait a second because I noticed sometimes I start talking before it goes live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Abdullah Samir show. Today, I'm joined by a friend of mine, someone who I have known for quite a few years online, mainly through Facebook, to a group that a mutual friend, Hassan Radwan, founded called Agnostic Muslims and Friends. So I met Frank online, as I was saying, and Frank is a Muslim, but he follows what he calls perennial Islam. So we're gonna get into that, what that means, and all that. And he's also a member of Muslims for Progressive Values, which is, I'll let him explain also what that is, and the mission and all of that. But Frank is someone that I found has thought about these things very deeply, has reflected on the meaning of life, the purpose of life, writes beautiful poetry, and just has a unique way of expressing himself. So I wanted to talk to Frank. Frank wanted to talk to me for a long time, but we never got down to it. And then I finally invited him. I said, let's have this conversation, for everyone to see, and for everyone can actually, so others can benefit, and see something a little bit different. Because normally when you think of Islam, we think of something very rigid, and a certain image comes to mind, and that is not at all what Frank is following or believing in. So how's it going, Frank?
Doing well, thank you.
Great. So let's start. Let's go back to the beginning. How did you find Islam, and how did you end up converting to it?
I'll try and make it a short story.
Okay.
I was an atheist most of my life. I was raised in a fairly traumatic home, raised nominally Christian. Rejected the idea that God is looking over children and people in general, because if God was looking over people, there wouldn't have been the Holocaust, there wouldn't have been Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and my father wouldn't have been sexually abusing me when I was a small child. So I just rejected the whole idea as being incoherent. In my early adulthood, I came across Alan Watts, who studied Buddhism extensively. I was very impressed with what he had to say. I read Buddhism on and off throughout my life, enjoyed it, liked it. It spoke to me. The central issue in Buddhism is that, in my conception of it anyway, is that everything is interconnected, and nothing is independent. So any event that arises exactly as it must arise, given the circumstances surrounding it, which made sense to me rationally. I mean, that's the basis of science, is that things happen because they're caused. They don't happen unless they're caused. And then I happened across Sufism just by accident. A friend mentioned something, and I began reading Sufism. And I found that same central insight in Sufism that I found in Buddhism, except instead of saying there's a boy that says there's a God, and I really enjoyed Sufism, and I thought, yeah, it wrapped all that up in a romantic package, and I'm a romantic guy, so I like that. And some friends invited me to join a group of Muslims who were followers of Fethullah Gulen, who's a fairly modern concept of Islam from Turkey, but still fairly rigid.
What's it called again?
Fethullah Gulen. He's a very famous preacher in Turkey. He lives in exile in the U.S. The president of Turkey, I can't think of his name right now, accused him of being the one who fomented the coup a few years ago.
So Erdogan did that?
His name?
Was it Erdogan who accused him?
Yes, Erdogan. Yeah. Yes. I don't think he was involved at all, but so what? Anyway, some of his followers here in Columbus were putting on a series of programs about Rumi, and so I went to attend those. And at some point, they said, "Would you like to go to Turkey? We're going to go to Turkey." And I said, "Well, sure, I'd love to go, but I can't afford to go." They said, "Oh, no, we'll pay for it. All you have to do is buy a ticket to Istanbul, and we'll pay for everything else." And I thought, no, I can't take any, that kind of charity. What the hell? But then I thought, I won't get to Turkey otherwise. I mean, I'm not a man of means, So I went home, told my wife, "I'm going to Turkey. You want to go?" She said, "Sure." So,
Awesome.
So we went to Turkey, and they took us around Turkey for over a week. Paid all the hotel bills, paid for everything, and all we had to do was just be there and smile and be nice, that kind of thing. And I met all these lovely, lovely Muslims who felt to me something like an Amishman feels here in the States. Deeply spiritual, simple, humble, that kind of thing. And I loved it. I went to, they took us to Konya to see the whirling dervishes. And it took place in a great big arena. It was sponsored by the state. The state put it on. And it's this giant arena. You buy a ticket, that kind of thing. And I'm watching these dervishes whirl during their show, and I was offended. I mean, this is supposed to be something sacred. Here the state's controlling it, selling tickets. It pissed me off. And our guide said afterwards, he said, "Well, how'd you like it?" And I said, "Well, it was okay. It's fine." I didn't want to tell him that. I went back to the hotel and went to bed that night. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and I was seeing those dervishes again in my dream. And this time, the state didn't have anything to do with it. The tickets weren't there. And I saw this ritual that was holy, and it just touched my heart so much, that it made me want to serve goodness. The desire was so deep that I was crying and sobbing, shaking the head, woke my wife up. It was a profound experience for me. Well, anyway, I came back, and shortly after that, one of the people I'd met over there mailed me a tesba, the prayer beads.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I can't pray, but there's no God to pray to, but I'll start a practice of gratitude. 5 times a day, I'll sit down with these tesbas and I'll touch a bead and think of something I'm grateful for, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a transformative process. I mean, oh my God, to practice gratitude is, it resets your inner clock. It made me want to be a Muslim all the more. But I couldn't because I didn't believe in God. And then one day, I don't know what started. I started thinking about intelligence itself. What does knowing amount to? I mean, how do we know anything? I decided that what knowing amounts to is making observation of reality, connecting things up, creating a model of the world around you, and then kind of running it forward in your imagination to see what's going to happen next. It's like a computer. Like a computer calculates the weather. You take measurements. You make a model of the weather. You run it fast, and today you can see what's going to happen in 2 weeks. So that's what our brain is doing. Well, what's the readout? What are we doing when we read out that calculation? Well, that's just more thought. All there is thought. And thought. If you look at thought scientifically, thought is a neural event. It's not something mysterious and spooky, spiritual. It's just a neural event. And so if this neural event that is happening in my mind is a model of the reality outside of myself that I'm running in order to understand reality, if that's intelligence, why isn't the thing that I'm modeling also intelligence? I mean, it's the same thing. It's a complex event, and my seeing it is just another complex event. So now I have this view of reality that it is perfectly interconnected, that it's one, that it's a singularity, and it's intelligent. And if I'm intelligent, it's intelligent. If I'm caring, it's caring. If I'm emotional, it's emotional. So now I have a view of God. So now I can be a Muslim.
Do you find, though, that when you say, so Alan Watts says something interesting. He said that we are the universe self-actualizing, something to that effect of that, meaning that the universe has become conscious to us. And by, us pondering on the creation of the universe, we're pondering on the creation of ourselves. When you say that God has, intelligence and all, like, how do you, so you told me that you don't see any separation between God and the universe. Is that correct?
Right.
So how do you ascribe like these characteristics like intelligence and things like that to the universe?
My understanding of Watts is not that he thought the universe is aware through us. I would rather say that he thought the universe itself was aware.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And our awareness is a subset of the universe's awareness. We're as waves on the ocean. We're not moving the ocean. The ocean's moving us. We're not raising ourselves. We're not doing anything. We're what the ocean is doing. Watts is famous for saying the earth peoples. The earth is peopling. That's why we're here. The universe is peopling, and it's probably doing something else somewhere else. Who the hell knows? But we are what it's doing. We are not doing it.
So wait, but humans have all sorts of goals and claims and values, and a lot of those contradict themselves. For example, some people are humanists, some people, and you find people that care about the environment, and there's some people that are just willing to plow it. Many religiously inspired theists believe that this world is eventually going to come to an end, and that, for example, God made our wives to plow as we sow or whatever, and God made animals for us to serve us and for us to use. And it's a very different perspective from the sort of modern ethics, environmentalism. I kind of see the two as odds to each other. And how do you reconcile all that with your perspective on like the universe and all that?
Let's talk about revelation for a moment.
Okay.
That's a big issue in all religions, revelation. I began to think about what happened to Muhammad when he had his revelation. And what's the difference between Muhammad's revelatory thought and Muhammad's ordinary thought or non-revelatory thought? I mean, what makes that difference? I can't believe that there's some spooky being that reached into his head and turned a switch. No, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
So what is the difference? And here's what I think the difference is. We all have a sense of being separate beings, that ego or nafs, and that sense of separate being uh, is intensely defensive and intensely opportunistic. I mean, we are constantly watching for danger and looking for an opportunity. And so the ego is the filter through which we see reality. And we don't see the actual reality. We just see what we are afraid of or what we hope for. I know it's to be the case that sometimes the ego can be inactive. Sometimes it just gets switched off. And in that moment when the ego is switched off, there's no filter for our seeing. And we see beauty and we love. You know, the only thing that keeps us from love is our ambition and our fears. Otherwise, I define love as profoundly focused attention, profoundly focused, non-critical attention. You know, if you look at a thing without criticizing it, without having any hopes of it, without having any fear of it, you'll see it as it is, and you'll love it. I mean, that's just well, anybody can run the experiment and they'll find the same thing. You know, when the ego is turned off, we love what we see, and we're at peace. And that moment of the ego being turned off is so different from our ordinary experience, from our daily experience, from the experience that hardly ever stops grasping us. And when it is turned off, there's a moment of peace and beauty that is just beyond description. It cannot be described. And that's the moment, that's the prophetic moment. And it's the moment that all the prophets saw. You know, they saw reality, God's body, arrayed in infinite perfection and perfect beauty. You know, and they were astounded. And they came back from that with this sense of peace and love, and this search for goodness and justice, those kinds of things. But when they describe it, they're describing it from an egoic perspective, because the ego is necessary for any kind of behavior, even speaking. Yeah. And the people that heard it were hearing it from an egoic perspective. So of course it's corrupted. You know, every religion is corrupted.
Yeah.
You know, every religion is corrupted by ego. Everything we do is corrupted by ego. It's only in the prophetic moment that we're not corrupted by ego. And it's only in the prophetic moment that we see the real unfiltered. And of course, we don't see the whole real. You know, we just see what our senses are capable of grasping. You know, but what we do see, we see without error. You know, there's no ego to corrupt it. So that's the egoic moment. And that's the source of religion, is that egoic moment. But every religion is constructed in an egoic moment, not in a non-egoic moment, not in a prophetic moment. So
I was going to say that modern science has actually confirmed a lot of some of these old things. You know, a lot of what you're saying is definitely emphasized in Eastern religions. Buddhism, for example, talks about non-duality, about, you know, loss of ego. For me, when I started studying these, when I started looking into these religions, into meditation, into mindfulness, I found it quite profound. The idea, it's a very different model from like Orthodox Sunnism, which is where I came from, which is reward and punishment. You do things to avoid punishment and to get reward. It's very egoic, actually. And when you read, you know, like, you will get this reward for doing this and you'll be punished if you don't do this. It's very, very egoic. But when I started to study this different perspective, it was profound to me. It was like my mind was blown, because what I realized is that this ego is basically a defense mechanism. that we have. We've
Yes.
evolved this ego,
Yes.
and this ego makes sure that we are taken care of, that I
Yes.
come first.
Yes. Yes.
That that
Yes.
if somebody tries
Yes.
to hurt me, I will hurt you
Yes.
back. And
Yes.
I want more, and I do agree with you that we do find there are examples of this in Islam where it actually, I I don't know. I don't know if I would say that Islam is the best example of this, but maybe you can actually interpret it in that way. But for example, Surah Takatur, which talks about, piling up of things and mutual rivalry, and you'll never, all we want to do is pile up things, which is again a very human thing to do, to pile up things. I mean, so what I learned from science is that in our brains there's something called the default mode network, and the default mode network is something that is there that creates the sense of ego. So
Yes.
psychedelics, such as shrooms or other ones, they can actually turn off the default mode network. And it's interesting that the way the brain is wired or evolved, the brain is not, you would think that it would be the other way around. But the way the brain is wired is we have this egoless brain, and then this default mode network thing comes in and restricts it, which is weird, right? Because if you turn that off, you get this feeling of loss of ego and connectedness, right? Why would we have evolved, an ego? Again, it goes back to the fact that it aids in survival. If we were all blissed out and, just like pondering on the universe.
Well, we would have died off.
Exactly, right? So, our ancestors, Homo sapiens, it appears that they inflicted mass slaughter on, I don't know for sure, we don't know for sure if this is what happened, but one theory is that we basically murdered competitors like Neanderthals and whatever.
Yes.
Maybe we didn't. Maybe we just outperformed them. Maybe we were just like smarter, faster, whatever.
I'm guessing
we didn't necessarily murder them. Although, like you see how humans are. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually, like, every continent we go on, we end up destroying the ecosystem. Like when humans came to Australia, all of the marsupials, the giant marsupials, are all dead. Within a matter of years, we destroyed. We're the most invasive species on Earth, right? So, although that aids survival, I mean, we've evolved. So I do think that there's some gems here, gems that can help us humans to get past our egoic selves. The ego has, I think, it had its time, but I think for the survival of humanity now, like Eckhart Tolle has a book called The New Earth. He talks about how we need to get past the greed, the selfishness, the basically, putting ourselves first, not caring about anybody else. We need to get past that, and we need something that's going to take humanity to the next stage of evolution. A stage where
That's what every religion has tried to do.
Yeah. So when you said that being thankful was transformative, that actually connected with me too. This is something that I find religion gets right. The idea of being thankful, the idea of, because what happens is, again, when we go back to evolution, we have a funny, our brains are funny. And when I say they're funny, what I mean is that we can never be happy. And that's, again, part of the ego, right? We acclimatize ourselves to whatever level of wealth, of quality of life, of, whatever we have, no matter how good it is, we'll always find something to complain about. And that's the human nature. So you could be like the most, spoiled kid on the block, yet you'll still be complaining, whereas some other kid in Africa might not even have food to eat, excuse me, and he's, he may have a totally different happiness level than you, because he has a different social circle, he's playing with his friends in the mud or whatever, chasing chickens, and whereas this kid is on a TV all day and he feels depressed because he doesn't go out. And it's hard to say, right? But we've evolved to this thing where we're never happy, right? And so being thankful, I think that's something good that religion teaches, and I do think it teaches that being thankful. Although in the case of Islam, it's all about being thankful to God. In my case, you know, I'm not sure, who to be thankful to, the universe, like.
For me, the heart of Islam is Tawheed, and Ikhlas, Surah Ikhlas, is said to be half of the Quran, and it's about Tawheed, one through all extending, undependent and unending, undescendant and undescending, and all that comes to be comes alone from one intending. That's my rendering of Ikhlas. When we understand that the real, that which is, apart from which is nothing else, when we understand that the real has total control over everything within it, when we understand that each breath that we take is given us by the real, each feeling we have is assigned to us by the real, each thought that we have is generated by the real. When we understand our complete dependence upon the real, peace overtakes us. You know, my survival is no longer my responsibility. It's what the real is doing. And I needn't worry about my reaction to the environment. The real will generate those reactions. I needn't worry about making a plan for executing my life. The real will create that plan. When we understand that, really, really profoundly, we're at peace, we're humble, we're non-judgmental, and we're grateful. Everything I have is given me. I didn't create myself. You know, I don't own anything and not do anything. Everything is just simply a gift. You know, when we understand that profoundly, that's the end of all this ego bullshit that causes wars and politics and all those things.
I want to ask you.
It is right there, and it's right there in the Quran. It's there intensely. In Surah in 2:25. One of my favorite verses of the Quran. There is one through, O thou who are the one unpartnered power, the incessant source of every hour, the eternally alive and self-derived, the untiring and never retired.
Wait,
you arrange all in heaven's.
Which one is it? 225?
Yes. 255, maybe. Yeah, 255.
255. Fun. Okay, sorry, I had the long one on screen. Okay.
O thou who are the one unpartnered power, the incessant source of every hour, the eternally alive and self-derived, the untiring and never retired. You arrange all in heaven's girth, and all is well upon the earth. None there is to hold control but you who own the whole. You know all that we can't see, know our past and yet to be, and we know not till you agree. Your power pervades all heaven and earth, and effortless preserves their worth. And in you alone must every soul find its source and gain its goal.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you about something related to what you were saying.
It's peace and joy.
Yeah. Yeah. This idea of ever-living God. I wanted to ask you about something you kind of mentioned. It was related to this. Is this what you were saying? Like, there's a hadith that says that if you were to rely upon Allah with the required reliance, and He would provide for you just as a bird is provided for, for it goes out in the morning empty and returns full. Is this the same type of idea?
Well, yeah, but with a caveat. You know, usually okay. This is understood as God's going to be good to me, but God may not be good to me. You know, there was a little girl who was born in Auschwitz, and who lived there for 3 years and lived in absolute misery, watched her mother and father die, and then died herself, and never knew a moment's joy. You know, God did that too. You know, so we should not expect that God is going to be good to us because because we admire God.
Yeah.
You know, God, the real doesn't need my admiration.
Yeah.
You know, if I admire the real, that's the real's doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So we mustn't expect that it's going to be a benefit to us. But in the prophetic moment, there's no self to be afraid. You know, and in remembrance of the prophetic moment, in zikr, there's a bit of a self, but the fear is largely abated. And here's another line of thought. I have a friend who's a scientist and a Mormon. Yeah, go figure. Do you think about Mormons? I mean, they're weird. You know, they pray for dead people, and they wear special underwear, and they're going to get a planet when they die to be the god of. They're weird. Yeah. This guy's a scientist and a Mormon. You know, how do you figure that? Well, he's going to have his own planet to be a god of. Well, if you're going to be a god, and if you're going to create a planet full of creatures, what do you need to do? I mean, maybe you're generous and you want to give them a good life. How do you do that? Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, you have to create, you know, this environment and put people in it, etc. You have to get them a sense of being individuals. You know, you have to give them an ego, and you have to create contrasts so their lives are meaningful. There has to be drama. There has to be pain. You know, so even the things that we are terribly averse to are part of the goodness of this gift of life. So if we're grateful for the gift of life, we have to be grateful, or at least tolerant of the things we're averse to. And if we understand that I'm not the center of the universe and God did not design everything for my benefit, I might have to accept some bad things that happen to me. I may turn out to be the bad example. We shouldn't pray. We shouldn't hope for good. We can't help but hope for goodness, but we shouldn't expect.
When you say there has to be pain, why do you think there has to be pain? Doesn't the idea of Jannah imply that, at least theoretically, there could have been no pain? I mean, isn't this all a post hoc rationalization to make ourselves feel better?
I don't think so. All experience is contrast. Without contrast, there's no experience. You know, pain's part of the contrast. Mm-hmm. There can't be babies without death. Yeah. You know, I love babies. Oh my goodness. I'm willing to die so there be babies, you know?
Well, there might be a future where there will be no death and there might still be babies. I mean, if we ever get to the point of curing all diseases, and, you know, some thinkers like Yuval Harari do think that we're coming to the age, or this might be the generation. I mean, I've heard people say we might be the last generation that dies. I mean, I don't know if it's that soon, but some of the scientific technology is becoming revolutionary now. I mean, we're not quite at the point of uploading our consciousnesses into computers or anything like that, or, you know, cryogenic, like, you know, unfreezing someone and bringing them back to life, but we are getting, you know, in some ways, like cloning, and like, I mean, there's a company out there, I think in Korea, that can clone your dead pet, and you can get. Now, the thing is, people probably don't realize that even if you clone the pet, it's still not going to be the same pet because it doesn't have the same memories. It's totally different. It's like if I was born today, I would not be the same person, even with the same genes. I would look the same, but my personality would be totally different, right? So I don't know. I don't know if I agree that there has to be death. I think death is. we do
We're just
die, but I mean, what if we don't die one day? I mean, just theoretically speaking, it's possible, right?
we're designed by evolution
Yeah,
to want to stay alive.
yeah.
The ones that didn't care about staying alive didn't, and they didn't have any children. So we're designed to want to stay alive. But life is a gift, and death is the gift that gives life its savor. If I had an infinite number of days yet to live, this day would be its value divided by infinity,
It would be
which is
meaningless.
worthless.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm 78 next month. You know, I'm close to death. You know, if I'm lucky, I have another 10 years. You know, I could die anytime. You know, with COVID, you know, I think about that. You know, the wrong person sneezes on me, you know, I might be gone in a week. You know, I don't know. And the proximity of death makes life so savory. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. The water at the bottom of the well is the sweetest. So death is not a tragedy. It's a gift.
Wow, that's I like it. I like what you said, that the water at the bottom of the well is the sweetest. I'm just gonna put that on the screen. I thought that was that was so eloquent. So when people feel suffering in the world, what's your advice to them? If someone has cancer or someone's about to die, what do you tell them? Like, how do you advise them? Because you don't tell them, oh, you're going to go to paradise, because you don't believe in paradise, do you?
Jesus said, "You're in the midst of the kingdom of heaven now. If you only knew, if you only opened your eyes." And when the filter of ego is removed, we are returned to Eden. You know, we are in the presence of God when the filter of ego is removed. But there's nothing the ego can do to discard itself. Whatever the ego does reinforces the ego's presence. So the prophetic moment, the moment of ego's absence, is a gift, and there's nothing we can do to bring it about. And it is only the ego that suffers. You know, and the suffering of the ego cannot escape the ego. You know, when the ego is switched off, what we are is pure awareness. We are sentient without fear and ambition. Everything just is, and everything is beautiful and good. I'm convinced that pure awareness, which I think is probably an analog for the soul, is constantly present. And we think it's hidden by the ego, but what thinks it's hidden by the ego is the ego. Do you see?
Yeah.
So the ego can't see that pure awareness. The ego can't see the soul. The ego can't be the soul. But the soul is still there, and still there. But I don't know what to say to suffering people. You know, if they're thirsty, give them a glass of water. You know, if they're hurting, give them some aspirin. If they're hungry, feed them. You know, if they're naked, give them clothes. I can't save the world. You know, people are dying constantly, and I can't keep them alive. You know, but you know, and there's a part of me that mourns. You know, we've had 130,000 deaths from corona here in the States. Each one of them is a person. You know, each one of them died too early. Each one of them had to say goodbye to each one of them is mourned by their family. Yeah, I start thinking about that, and you know, it's hard not to it's hard to keep your shit together.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's so sad.
Yeah.
You know, but it just is.
Yeah.
Know?
Indeed. Yeah, that is, I mean, and again, going back to the theme of, so here's the interesting thing. I never saw any of this in Islam. I see this more in, again, Eastern religions, Buddhism and stuff. And this idea of, you know, suffering is a given. I mean, Quran kind of goes into that too, I think, and you can see that theme for sure.
Oh,
suffering.
yeah. Yeah.
And maybe you can give some examples of that. But before you do, I'm just going to tell you how I see, like, the whole idea that, you know, that we cannot escape suffering ever, and that we just need to come to peace with it. I think that's so profound. The idea that, you know, you can't get rid of suffering. Life is suffering, but you can become at peace with it through mindfulness, through, like, you know, getting rid of your ego, to this, what you call, you know, prophetic moment, or, you know, being aware, right? Being in the moment. This can, you know, scientific studies have shown that meditation, you know, these things can reduce suffering of people that have chronic diseases, chronic illnesses. There's also a study right now that's kind of breakthrough, because there was a big ban on studying shrooms and psychedelics that is showing that for people that have severe depression, there was a study done on people that were about to die from cancer, and they gave them a pill of shrooms, and this was done in a clinical setting. So this is not like recreational use. This is testing it as a medicine, and it actually helped a lot of people. Like this one lady said that her husband, who was dying, after he took it, he was totally different. Like he is, and I think that what you're kind of saying has the same. It's a different route to the same effect. Without, you know.
Well, the only thing that fears is the ego. The ego
Yeah.
is the only thing that's afraid.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if the ego can be shut down or transcended, you know, fear can be dealt with or can be tolerated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I in my 30s, I had some mortal terror. You know, I had several dreams in which I had died and, you know, experienced death. Who knows? I mean, that's what it felt like. And I had this great fear that when I came to death, that I'd die in terror, you know, screaming, and, you know, and if I am awareness, that final moment is effectively eternal, because I won't see the end of it. My awareness will be shut off before it's shut off. Do you see what I'm saying? So if I'm afraid to die, and I die in terror, that's an eternal hell.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm at peace with death, you know, then, and if it's the case that coming right to death and being faced with it is no longer deniable, there's no point in being afraid. And if fear in that moment stops, then the flow of love is unimpeded. In that case, that final moment can be an eternal heaven, an eternal paradise. So every day I pray to take my last breath in peace and joy. That's my hope. That's my most fervent prayer.
And do you have any examples from the Quran where you find this theme? Again, what I find it interesting that you connect with the Quran, where I don't see, I mean, I do see themes of that, and I think you find that in Christianity too, but why Islam? Like, what's the connection you have? Is it because you had this experience with Sufism? And then, you know, because I see a lot of things in Islam that kind of contradict this. Like I was saying, the whole thing about reward and punishment, heaven and hell, you know, you must obey Muhammad, and, you know, all of these things that you kind of find that I have a problem with when it comes to Islam. How do you reconcile all that? And are you just picking and choosing the things that you like, or do you see it? How do you do that? How do you?
Well, I don't view the Quran as being, I don't know how to say this. I don't view the Quran as being God's total communication to humanity.
Okay.
You know, in order for the Quran to be God's total communication to humanity, it would have to be a lot larger than it is. You know?
Yeah.
You'd have to have all the trees would have to be made pens, all the seeds would have to be made ink, you know, etc. But we can catch a glimpse of God. You know? We can catch a glimpse of that goodness. And I think that's what happened to Muhammad. You know, I think he had the prophetic. He was entered into the prophetic moment, fell upon him. You know, when he saw that. And the early surahs are just incredible. I mean, they're just such beauty. But he went to Mecca, and they made him the leader. They made him a politician. You know, and now he had to write rules. And so we got a lot of rules. You know, and that's all ego stuff. You know, but beyond that. Suppose you had that egoic moment had fallen upon you. Suppose you'd had the prophetic moment, and you had seen perfection and beauty, and you'd seen how awful the filter of ego is, how it casts people into a literal hell. Suppose you wanted to tell people about that. What would you tell them? You know, you can't. There's no instruction that you can give people for their prophetic moment. You know, there's no exercise you can give them to do, because whatever they do reinforces the ego. So all you can do is write the rules about how to be good. You know, how to be, you know, what's the best way to have, it's like the American Constitution. You know, it was written because people aren't angels. And we need government because people aren't angels, but government isn't angels either, so we have to have restrictions on government. So Muhammad had to set up this governance amongst all these egoic people and give them rules that would make the best of their situation. And so that's what I think all the rules are about. This is trying to make the best of the situation. And it happened at a particular moment in time with particular people, and they don't apply universally. So we need to pick and choose.
I wonder how much of what Muhammad was doing was caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. Have you ever thought about that possibility?
I have thought about that. Yes, I have. Yes. I don't know what to think about that. I don't pay much attention to it.
Can I just share a small clip from on my screen for a second?
Sure.
So I have this video, Science of Prophethood. I'm just going to play a little clip.
No. He has a seizure. He'll want to talk philosophy. He'll want to discuss all the things that are floating around in this stew he's got up here that he's trying to reconstruct. Thoughts that he may have had just floating through his mind while he was in a seizure mode may come surfacing.
I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so,
but also, you said he's become more emotional because of the seizure. So that's helpful too.
Much more sensitive. But oddly enough, not in regards to himself. Okay. But in regards to atrocities, disasters, things like that, anywhere and everywhere. Wrongs done to other people.
Oh my God. And you know what? I am so right in my own head. I know I could go out there and get people to follow me. Not like these wackos with sheets on their heads. Not like those idiots.
Right.
But now it's just the new generation of the prophets.
Yep.
And were all the prophets people that were flopping around on the ground? Is that what this whole message was? The gift from the gods this whole time?
That's possible, isn't it? Yeah.
I've never been religious, ever. People say, no, you can't see into the future. That's what that gift is, but you got to pay for it by getting slammed around.
Now, why do these patients have intense religious experiences when they have these seizures? And why do they become preoccupied with theological and religious matters even in between seizures? One possibility is that the seizure activity in the temporal lobe somehow creates all kinds of odd, strange emotions in the person's mind, in the person's brain. And this welling up of bizarre emotions may be interpreted by the patient as visits from another world, or as God is visiting them. Maybe that's the only way he can make sense of this welter of strange emotions going on in his brain.
Okay, sorry, that was it. Yeah, so when I see something like that, and I see what modern neuroscience is kind of unearthing, to me it feels like this gift that people got, maybe it wasn't actually, I mean, it was a gift in some ways. It gave them, like, there's another clip, I was hoping it was in there, but it wasn't there, where they asked him, what if I could take away your seizures? Would you want to take it away? And he said no, because he's like, he feels such profound like connection to God and the universe, and like it's you could see he was crying just talking about it. It was so overwhelming. I mean, to him it was a gift, and obviously there's some negative side effects of having a seizure which are damaging to you, so probably he would have to stop it by taking antipsychotic drugs. But like just looking at it from a materialistic perspective, isn't that what like prophethood could be? It could be just the misfiring of neurons in the brain to like, although you're not saying, you're not claiming that he spoke to an spooky being, as you put it, like, so that's good that we're on the same page there. And I think a perspectives are actually much closer than most other people I've talked to. But I still feel that, isn't it just come back down to the brain again at the end of the day, this like spiritual experience?
Well, number one, the only thing we ever see is our thoughts. I don't see the screen in front of me. Something's happening in my head. I have, all I see is my thoughts. I can't see anything else. Period. So, and I'm not in control of them. I'm not generating my thoughts. They're just happening. I don't exist until my brain does what it does, and then all of a sudden here I am. I'm me. I'm not in control of that. So, and what's causing my thoughts? It's a system that involves my brain and all my sensory organs in my environment, and my environment extends into the whole universe. So, the universe, reality, the real, is giving me my thoughts. So in that sense, the real is talking to me constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Every thought that I have is given me by the real. Every feeling that I have is generated by the real. Every decision I'm making is an activity that the real is engaged in. So there's a sense in which Muhammad heard the real, heard God. But in that same sense, every individual on the planet hears God constantly. The difference between a prophetic moment and the normal moment is the egoic filter is removed. Perhaps epilepsy can remove the egoic filter. Perhaps drugs can remove the egoic filter. Perhaps sometimes it just spontaneously shuts down in meditation all on its own. When it does, we are filled with peace and joy. It's indescribable peace and joy. I mean, it's astounding. When it happened to me, this happened to me perhaps about 40 years ago. I was sitting in Quaker meeting. I was attending Quaker meeting then because it was during the war, during the arms race. I was terribly concerned about nuclear war. I was convinced that we were all going to die in a nuclear war. I couldn't imagine anything else. I was a nuclear weapons activist. The end of my career as an activist was a civil disobedience. I went out to Kansas and crawled across the fence in a nuclear missile silo and sat in a silo, and they arrested me and threw me in jail for 7 months. But at that time I was a Quaker, and I was sitting at Quaker meeting. Quaker meeting is a meditation. Sometimes somebody has something to say, but usually it's an hour's meditation. And I was sitting in Quaker meeting one morning, trying to understand what it means to be a person within reality. And I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. And it was such an intense struggle to finally see it. I finally just gave up. And all of a sudden, I saw the whole of reality arrayed in utter perfection, was filled with this peace and joy. And looking back on all that, I assumed that was a moment in which the ego failed. When I came back from that moment, when the ego began to return, I had a sense of who it is that I am. I understood that that moment is constantly present, whether I'm aware of it or not. And when I die, it's into that moment that I die, and that I have this world to live in, and I can't spend the rest of my life chasing that moment, because there's things to do in the world. You know, we have responsibility. You know, so, but the memory of that, Zikr, is peace.
You just reminded me of something interesting. When I was listening to Hamza Yusuf's Life of Muhammad series, he put it beautifully. He said that when Muhammad was at the lowest of his low, you know, Khadija was dead. He just came back from Taif and they were throwing rocks at him. When he was like at the point of like complete failure, it was at that point where Isra wal Miraj happened, where he like flew up to whatever, see Allah. It's kind of reflects what you just said. Like you said, when, you know, you were at the point of complete, you just basically were about to give up on this effort to like discover reality. And all of a sudden it was like, suddenly it happened to you. And maybe that's what happened to Muhammad too, that this like, and Eckhart Tolle talks about that in his book, The Power of Now, how his awakening happened when he was depressed and down and feeling worthless, and he was at the lowest point in his life. And then all of a sudden his ego was broken and he reawakened with this inner peace that just came out of nowhere. I don't know how that happens to people, because some people, that doesn't happen to everybody. Some people, they just get broken and then it just gets worse, or they kill themselves. How does that happen?
You know, I think it's not all that uncommon. You know, when you're out for a walk and you look up and you see this beautiful sunset, you know, for a moment you forget yourself and you just bask in the beauty. You know, when the baby goos and gurgles, you know, and you're filled with love for the child, for a moment you forget yourself, you know, and the love for the child fills you. You know? So I don't think it's all that rare. What is rare is for it to come to you in such a way. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know how to describe it.
The awakening is definitely a gift. I've done some meditation. I've never experienced loss of ego just yet. I don't meditate that much, I guess. But hopefully one day. It's definitely something I want to experience at least once, is this experience of oneness, you know, with the universe. And
the quick way is LSD.
Maybe one day, when my kids grow up. So before we switch to the next topic, which I want to talk about, which is your experiences trying to excuse me, trying to you know, establish an LGBT friendly mosque, I just want to make an appeal to viewers of the channel, subscribers and supporters, to please consider subscribing to the channel if you're new here. If you're not new here, please consider joining. Every little bit of support helps. Thank you guys all so much. Now, I'd like to talk about one more thing. So this, I think we've actually given this topic is due, right, about the ego, about reality, and I think we covered it well. I want you to kind of, before we end off, I want you to share your experiences with trying to establish an LGBT friendly mosque in, I believe, Ohio, you said, and you know, it didn't go well. What do you like? Can you tell us that story?
Well, when I decided to be a Muslim, in addition to being a Sufi, for several years, I did the prayers and did all the rituals and that kind of thing. Did the fast, everything. That no longer seems terribly important to me, but it did at the moment. I went to mosque. The first mosque I went to was Somali immigrants, and I was the only American person in the mosque, and I think they all thought I was probably FBI. So I found an African American mosque, the followers of W.D. Muhammad, the offshoot of the Nation of Islam, a very rational offset of Nation of Islam. And I was fairly comfortable there. Men and women were separated. I didn't like that very much, but oh well. And then one day the imam made some mocking remarks about homosexuals, about LGBTs. And I just walked out. Both my daughters are gay. And I'm half gay. I fell in love with a young man when I was in my 20s. Of course, this was back in the 1960s, before the revolution. I was embarrassed by it. I never told anybody. I never told him, but I was madly in love with him. I later married and was married to my first wife for 22 years, raising my two sons. And several times I fell in love with other young men during that time. And again, I was embarrassed by it, and I never acted on it. When that marriage broke up, I decided to find a boyfriend instead of a girlfriend, and I was interviewing. And then I met Jean and fell in love with her. And for the last 32 years, I've been more blissfully happy than I ever imagined was possible. And I'm, we're totally loyal to one another. Neither one of us would think about having any kind of dalliance. But I see attractive men, and I find them attractive. I think about those things. So I know that about myself. And at this point in my life, I'm very comfortable with that. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not bothered by it. It's just who I am. And I think the ostracizing people for feeling the things they feel is a terrible, terrible, terrible injustice. And I just couldn't tolerate it. I did a web search. I came across MPV, Muslims for Progressive Values. This would have been 2011 or 12. In 2012, I attended their national conference in New York. It wasn't a big deal. It was, 20, 30 people maybe. The call to prayer was recited by a woman. We lined up for prayer, men and women, gay and straight. It didn't matter who stood where. The khutbah was delivered by a man, but it could have easily been delivered by a woman in that circumstance. It just felt at home to me. And when I left there, I told Ani Zonneveld, who's the leader of MPV, that when I came back the next year, I'd bring her a report of MPV Columbus. And so I went home and I set about organizing Muslims for Progressive Values in Columbus. We had some success. The most people we ever had for Friday prayer was 6. Very often it was just me and my wife. Sometimes my wife and I and some younger person, some other person. I persisted for up until just a year or so ago. And I finally decided, there's no point now. If there's to be an MPV Columbus, I'm obviously not the one to organize it because I've tried for 7 or 8 years and nothing has come of it. So there's no point in me pursuing it any further. With just a little bit of encouragement, I'd pursue it again, but it's not, that encouragement's not forthcoming. I've concluded that I've talked to a number of Muslim leaders around Columbus about homosexuality, and there are a number of people who are willing to say that it isn't sinful, that it's just a natural part of being a human being for some people, but they're not willing to say it openly. You know, they would be so ostracized in their communities that they're just not willing to do it. So I've concluded that the people who need MPV, who would be at home in an MPV mosque, aren't willing to come because it's too socially costly for them. And the ones who have really rejected mainstream Islam's condemnation of homosexuality have also rejected Islam, and they don't need it. They don't need Jannah. So there's no audience. And so, but that, that's going to change. The majority of Muslims in America support gay marriage. So there's a large Muslim community in America that understands this issue.
Yeah.
That is just reluctant because the hardliners are so vociferous. But that dam is going to break. That dam broke here in the States. It just took a few years.
Yeah.
Just up until just a few years ago, homosexuality was aberrant. And we couldn't even think about marriage. And when that dam finally broke, it just spilled out. That's going to happen in American Islam or Western Islam too. It just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, it seems like there's a very different situation in the UK and the US. In the US, like you said, you have the situation now where in some places there's more Muslims who support gay marriage than evangelical Christians. So
yes.
Even though, the creeping Sharia, crowd is always, trying to rile up people against Muslims, it's actually the Christians who are being more bigoted in some places in the US now than Muslims. And
that has to do with the education level.
With
Most
the what?
fundamentalist Christians, education level.
Mm-hmm.
Most fundamentalist Christians are not well educated.
Mm.
There are a lot of professional Muslims in America that are very well educated.
Oh, I see. Okay.
In the UK, that's not the case.
Yeah, unfortunately, in the UK, I think, I'm not the one to diagnose it, but there's obviously sort of ghettos there. There's large areas where everyone's Muslim, which is unfortunate. You need to be. And I was listening to a podcast with Melissa Chen and Joe Rogan, where she said in Singapore, it's engineered so that every like neighborhood has a mix of the population that has like 60% Chinese, 10% Muslims, whatever the overall population is. So you don't never end up with like all of the, you don't end up with ghettos basically. And I think that helps a lot because when you're mixing with other people, it helps the exchange of ideas and all that. When you have these like all Muslim areas where everybody's wearing niqab and everybody speaks Urdu, and it's like you've created a little mini Pakistan that's more Pakistani than Pakistan itself, and which is unfortunate, And I do, and there's been a lot of trouble I think gay ex-Muslims, gays in general, have had in the UK because there's been people there's been schools where you must have heard, they pulled all the kids out of school because they were trying to teach that gay, being gay is okay, stuff like that. And I think that is definitely going to be a challenge, and it is as you try it as well to sort of deal with that. I do think that, one of my gay ex-Muslim friends, Jimmy London, told me that even in America, you'd find that they'd be okay with gay marriage, but they'd be less okay with their own kids being gay. So it hasn't quite got to the point where they're accepting of their own children being gay. They're okay with gay marriage theoretically. It's just not their, but when it comes to their families, then it's a whole different issue,
Well, it's a difficult issue. As children, we all find sex yucky as children.
Yeah,
that's our reaction. Well, most of us are straight. When we grow up, we have this attraction that makes us want to engage in those activities that we thought were yucky.
Yeah,
and we stop thinking they're yucky. But if we don't have attractions to men, we don't engage in those activities, they still stay yucky.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I don't think people, some people have never really thought about like putting themselves in a gay person's shoes and to think about what would it be like if like, everybody around you was saying you're not normal and this and that, whereas you literally have no choice. That's just what you are. And what do you do, right? I mean, it's such a silly thing to make a big, woo-ha about when it doesn't hurt anybody. It's a personal decision. It's my life. It shouldn't affect you. If you don't like certain things, don't engage in them, but like, don't tell me not to, because your rights end where my rights begin, and so I'm glad that in the US it's got much better, and I hope that in the UK and everywhere else it'll get better as well.
Well, it's the Islamic world has suffered a lot of colonization, and when the colonists come, you either adopt the colonists' values or you reject them. You're opposed to them, and if you're opposed to them, you go back to your traditional values, and they become even more intense than they were before the colonists came. So,
yeah. So, Frank, I want to thank you for having this conversation and for sharing your story, both about the challenge, with establishing the gay mosque, and also, thoughts on Islam, reality, and all of that. I forgot to talk about one thing, which was free will and determinism. Maybe we can end off with that, and then we'll end it on there. You mentioned to me that you're a determinist. You don't believe there's such a thing as free will. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, thought assumes that things happen because they're caused, and nothing happens without a cause. If things could happen without a cause, a pink giraffe could appear in my lap at any moment, right? And that never happens, So, I'm pretty confident that things happen because they're caused to happen. Well, things happen because they're caused to happen. My thoughts happen because they're caused to happen. And since I don't exist without my thoughts, I can't be the cause of them. So I'm not the cause of my thoughts. And so my thoughts are determined by something other than my attention to them. So I'm a determinist. There is no freedom. I'm not in charge. I'm not in charge of my thoughts. My thoughts are a wave on the ocean. They exist because the environment is what it is, and the brain is what it is. But it's to understand that is to be modest, to be humble, and to be grateful, and to be non-judgmental. But other than that, it doesn't make any difference. I still have to eat when I get up, and brush my teeth, and so. But that's also the essence of Islam. I mean, it's in the Quran again and again and again. God is doing you. You think you're doing yourself, and you're deluded.
Indeed. Do you want to give any final words, advice to the Muslim community, maybe, or I don't know, even to non-Muslims? Any final words you'd like to share? Maybe about love,
Let me share with you. I write a poem every day, sometimes several. Let me share with you one of my favorite poems. It's not a very good poem, but it's one of my favorites. It's not so much that we should pray, or even that we do pray, but that we are prayer. That's what we are. And the more we look into the prayer that we are, the more it turns from need to gratitude.
Beautiful. You have a page. Do you still work on the page, Perennial Islam? Do you still you still write on the page? Okay. I'm gonna share your page, and I'll add it to the description as well. For those who are interested in a more perennialist, perspective on Islam, and to follow you and your poetry. Thank you, Frank. This was a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad we actually were able to talk about this. Definitely, this is a unique perspective, and I'm glad to hear it. Maybe not. This isn't something that would appeal to everybody, but I do think that your thoughts and your perspectives and the whole spirituality thing is I think useful in some ways. It's a useful project that humanity has. It's a useful idea as well, and I'm glad that you're able to share that with us. Thank you so much.
Well, I've enjoyed it immensely. I love you. It was a good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, everyone, it's been a wrap, and thanks for joining. And I'll see all of you guys on I guess Friday with the 2 Abdullah show. Bye, everyone.